Hello everyone and welcome back to the 100 Movie Marathon. In case you don't know what this series is, I am breaking down my top 100 favorite movies ever made. You'd be forgiven if you didn't realize that this was a thing and you were subscribed to my channel. I have admittedly been neglecting the series since mid-summer this year. I've only released 4 episodes in this series so far this year, but moving forward I'm going to be more dedicated in getting these episodes out because at the end of the day, I enjoy making them, and while they do take longer and they're a bit more taxing when it comes to the script, I want to get this out there. It's what I dedicated my channel to, so moving forward, I will be dedicating more time to it. So with all of that in mind, let's get into number 84, what I'm covering today. Nowadays, superhero movies are a dime a dozen. Every year we're given multiple larger-than-life spectacles up on the big screen that it's hard to remember a time when they were few and far in between. Just this year we've gotten The Batman, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Wakanda Forever, Morbius. Just because there's more of them doesn't mean that they're all good. My point being that superhero films, while fun when done right, are very easy to come by now. So let's rewind back to 2005, I'm 9 years old, and the animated movies about talking cows just aren't quite cutting it anymore. I need a little bit more punch and kick as I move into my double-digit years, and I can't sneak watch Spider-Man 2 forever. Then one day, I'm at my grandparents' house, minding my own business, watching TV, I'm having a great time, and I come across an ad for a new movie about a guy dressed up as a bat beating people up to Nickelback's Someday. That preview that I saw long ago was for a little film called Batman Begins. The format of this video is going to look like this. I'm going to go into the history of the Batman character, or at least the movie version of the character, kind of what brought us to this point. I'm going to go over the production of the movie, and then I'm going to get into an actual breakdown of the movie itself, things that I like about it, actual plot points, all that good stuff. Batman Begins was released on June 15th, 2005, and was the long-awaited continuation of the character that had been previously touched on in the late 80s and mid-90s. It's hard to remember it now, but Batman was a sort of pariah for Warner Brothers at the time due to how bad the latest film had been. That being the now infamous film Batman and Robin that featured George Clooney as the Caped Crusader. I point out that Clooney was Batman here solely so the world will never forget. And not only was this guy Batman, but he was Batman in a terrible movie. A movie so bad that it single-handedly launched the Batman franchise into studio purgatory for nearly a decade. Warner Brothers knew that they screwed up when they let Tim Burton go. Burton had directed the first 2 films, Batman and Batman Returns, but wasn't brought back because the latter was deemed too dark and violent for mainstream audiences. The studio decided to move in the kid-friendly direction with Batman Forever that saw the transition from Michael Keaton to Val Kilmer. As far as a kid-friendly version of Batman goes, I think that this is fine. I watched it a lot as a kid, and I think Jim Carrey was fun to watch as the Riddler, and after that film made over $300 million, the studio signed up for another film from director Joel Schumacher. However, Val Kilmer opted out of it. Seeing another transition who was playing Batman from Val Kilmer to the aforementioned George Clooney. Batman and Robin saw a dip in $100 million in the box office and was also critically panned when it came out. It currently holds a 12%, that's 1-2, on Rotten Tomatoes and was nominated for 11 Razzies in the year it came out. It's commonly referred to as one of the worst comic book movies ever made. Watching the movie for myself, it feels more like a toy commercial than an actual movie. And that's because they had designed the toys that this movie was going to market out there before production had even started. Which should tell you everything that you need to know about how the studio saw the character of Batman at the time. He wasn't a fully fleshed out character, he was something that they could use to make a profit. Which making profit on a movie isn't a bad thing by any means, but you should try to be making a quality product to sell your product. The movie was so bad that Warner Brothers decided to scrap the 5th Batman movie that was going to be titled Batman Unchained that would have seen the return of Schumacher and Clooney and would have had the Scarecrow featured as the primary antagonist. Apparently Schumacher was looking at none other than Nicolas Cage to play the Scarecrow before ultimately deciding on the equally as talented actor Coolio. After Batman and Robin was a disaster, the studio pulled the plug on that film and was left wondering what to do next. Clearly, Batman could still be a profitable franchise even when you put out a terrible film, you make over $200 million. While a number of ideas were spitballed around the studio, they considered making a Robin spin-off movie, a movie version of Batman Beyond. They even toyed with the idea of a Batman vs. Superman movie way back in the late 90s. They were even set to shoot Batman vs. Superman in early 2003, but ultimately decided not to after J.J. Abrams, the man who made the best Star Wars movie ever, submitted a script for a solo Superman movie that was the more lighthearted tone for the character the studio wanted at the time. So after all of that, the studio decided that they just needed to reinvent the character of Batman. They couldn't just make another carryover from the last set of films. It was time to buckle down and get real, so the studio decided to go with a director who had just directed a movie for them back in 2002 called Insomnia. This guy had only made one studio film ever, but had made a couple of indie films that showed a lot of promise. Who was this young, up-and-coming director that the studio was taking a chance on? That man's name was Christopher Nolan, and thus brings us to the production of Batman Begins. Nolan's approach was going to be different from the previous filmmakers. He wanted the audience to connect with Bruce Wayne and see the character's growth through portraying his origin. Nolan also placed a major emphasis on the tone of the movie, saying in an interview that the most important thing was the tone of the film. The idea that we were going to tell the story in a realistic fashion, remove the frame of the comic book, and not pay homage to the medium that the characters come from, but actually just pass through that and immerse the audience in the story in a realistic fashion. Portraying this character in this sort of heightened reality hadn't been done up to this point. The previous movies were very clearly otherworldly, but something I love about Nolan's trilogy is how while it centers around a man who fights crime in a batsuit, it feels like it takes place here in our world. The characters and places feel real in his trilogy, and they surpass the more fantastic elements that were dove into in the last several movies. Dived, whatever. Nolan aimed to thrust the audience into a world they could relate to with a main character whose motivations seemed clear. Part of that involved casting actors who had respect in the industry who could play this serious and get the audience to buy into the story and its characters. And I'd say that they assembled a cast that did just that. They were able to sign on actors like Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, Cillian Murphy, Tom Wilkinson, Ken Watanabe, Gary Oldman as Commissioner Gordon, of course, Liam Neeson as our primary antagonist. Katie Holmes was featured as Rachel Dawes in this movie, and I think she's fine in the role, but she wouldn't return for this film's sequel. This movie managed to cast multiple actors in supporting roles that had either won an Oscar or would go on to win an Oscar. There was no doubt heading into production that they managed to have a solid group of actors there that could ground the movie in realism and give it some legitimacy. But let's be real, the most important part you're gonna cast in this is Bruce Wayne / Batman. In my opinion, the perfect actor for this role was gonna be someone who could embody both characters of Bruce Wayne and Batman. Batman is a being that should be feared by all those who stand in his way, but Bruce Wayne is someone who has to come across as this egocentric playboy, but is secretly a genius who needs to be the detective that Gotham needs without getting caught. He needs to be the character who's the muscle, brains, and mask behind the operation. There have been many actors that have stepped into this role, and maybe it's just the fact that I grew up with this version of Batman, but I think that they casted this perfectly with Christian Bale. Coming into Batman Begins, Christian Bale was one of the best young actors you could get for your film. He had been a child actor for Steven Spielberg in Empire of the Sun, he had been in Newsies and Little Women later at that point in his career, and he was now shifting into more adult roles. He was gaining a reputation to be a guy who would do anything for a role and would deliver. And now it's talked ad nauseum about how he fully embraces the characters that he decides to take on. This guy is a freak. He literally transforms his body for movies. Whenever he met with Christopher Nolan, there was some actual concern on if he could beef up in time to film the movie, because right before Batman Begins, he filmed The Machinist and was like a stick walking around. The guy is 6 feet tall, and for The Machinist, he only weighed 110 pounds. Nolan literally said that he was, quote, a bag of bones. However, he managed to stuff his face with food and lift like a madman, getting up to 220 for this film that released a year later. Absolute insanity. In fact, he actually got too big for this role, and people said on the set that they were shooting Batman, not Fat Man, so he gained all this weight and muscle mass, but he looked kind of like a gorilla, and this version of Batman is supposed to be a ninja. So he then had to lose some of that weight and lean down. This guy is both an incredibly dedicated and gifted actor. Similar to sports, you get guys who can be one or the other, so to get someone who's both is remarkably rare. This isn't exactly a hot take, but I think up to this point in his career, his best role was American Psycho. In that movie, he's got to play basically two roles: the businessman he portrays to everyone, and the real psycho killer he is inside. While that's not the same as Batman, I could see how a casting director could look at that role and say, okay, this guy understands how to play a role where there's a lot more going on, and they basically have to pretend to not be themselves. They're playing two different people here. And that, like I said, is extremely important whenever you're playing the Bruce Wayne / Batman character. Before Bale was cast, many actors were up for the role, including future Superman actor Henry Cavill and Heath Ledger, who would go on to win an Oscar for portraying the Joker in this movie's sequel. Cillian Murphy, who was Scarecrow here, even screen tested for the role. You can look it up online and actually see him as Bruce Wayne. Ultimately, while I think each of these actors could have added something to the role, I think that they made the right decision with Christian Bale. In this film, he does such an incredible job of portraying this character who's been broken down, built back up to where he can differentiate on his own what's right and wrong, rise from his failures, and become a defender for the city while still having his own demons he needs to work through. Not a perfect character by any means, but a great story arc over the course of this trilogy. A man who uses the Batman demeanor to shield himself from his own mind while also helping others. So with a set of actors and a script that could get the audience to buy in, they were finally ready to enter production on the movie. Production on superhero movies are really interesting because they have to toe the line between what they need to shoot with practical effects and CGI. I'm not one of those guys who just broadly thinks CGI is bad and practical is good. I think if CGI is done well, it can bring to life places and beings that you couldn't possibly portray in a realistic fashion with practical effects. Now, there are many examples of bad CGI because when it's done poorly, it gives the art form on the whole a bad rap. But what's most important is whatever a film does for its location or effects, it's got to serve the story and tone you're going for. And for this movie, it was very important that in order to get the audience to latch in and believe that it's something grounded in this world, practical effects were gonna be the way to go for the most part. The previous Batman films had portrayed Gotham in that more CGI fashion, this otherworldly city. While, you know, it's kind of like our world, it's not like any city that exists in real life. But Nolan opted to shoot in cities like London, Chicago, New York City in order to give that movie that sort of realism and help make it feel more real and recognizable to audiences. They even made an actual Batcave that I hope is still standing today. Knowing how quickly Hollywood moves on and the fact that it's been almost 20 years, I doubt it, but a guy can dream. This sort of realism carried over into the vehicles, and while they needed to make something that was otherworldly, something that you don't really see driving around on the streets, and needed to be something tangible and kind of down and dirty. And with that, they gave us the Tumbler, which is one of my favorite vehicles in a movie ever. Each one of these things cost $250,000 to build, and they made 4 of them, so they did not spare any expense on this Batmobile. And I don't see people refer to it as a Batmobile. It's known as the Tumbler, but I mean, it's the Batmobile, right? Like, I've seen it on the Warner Brothers lot. It's so cool. If you have the opportunity to see one of these things, you have to. This thing is a beast of a machine. This film also employed traditional stunt work versus CGI for the fight scenes, which comes across very real for sequences like the one in Ra's al Ghul's temple where Bruce has to fight off a bunch of ninjas. For choreography like this, I'm sure it required weeks of practice to get the stuff down. Nothing but respect from me to everyone who had a hand in the stunt work for this movie. So while this movie employed CGI strategically in scenes where there was just no way to get around it, for the most part, they decided to go with practical effects. This was going to be grounded in realism like Nolan envisioned and pitched to the studio, and it shows in the production of the movie. Major props to the decision makers at the time at Warner Brothers for greenlighting this thing, because this thing wasn't cheap and they did a lot of practical effects. It would have been easier to go the CGI route almost like they had done the previous films, but they knew what they needed to do for the brand of the character. Major props to them and Christopher Nolan. But now that I've gone through the making of this movie and what the filmmakers were trying to do with it, how about I go through the actual movie itself? So now I'm gonna move through the plot of the movie and highlight aspects of it that I really enjoy, but if you like this video up to this point, please remember to subscribe. It really helps me out on the channel, and it shows me that you like this sort of content. Now with that obligatory plug for my channel out of the way, let's get into the actual movie Batman Begins. Like I said before, this movie decides to go into Batman's origin, which hadn't really been done in any of the film adaptations up to this point. Now, in order to do this, Nolan employs a method that he uses in several of his movies, non-linear storytelling. This is when a film goes back and forth in time, oftentimes drawing comparisons to a person's present circumstances versus what happened to them in the past. Nolan is probably the best mainstream director that does this, and he employs it perfectly in this movie. In any ordinary story about Batman's origin, it would logically place him as a kid at the very beginning. And while Nolan does do this to an extent, we also cut to Bruce while he's a full-grown adult in a foreign prison somewhere. In fact, I timed it. We get a minute of child Bruce before we cut to Christian Bale's version. The scene that Nolan starts with is Bruce as a child falling into what will become the Batcave, indicating to us, the viewer, that while he had a life before that event, this is really where everything began, only to cut to him waking up in prison, symbolizing that while this was long ago, it is still an experience that haunts his nightmares as an adult. Through the first 2 minutes, Nolan already signals to us that this is going to be a different type of origin story. That instead of telling the story in a more straightforward manner, Nolan's going to challenge us to look at how the movie's edited and see what comparisons we can draw between the past and the present for Bruce. This is far different than any other origin story that had been done up to this point that I know of. A really gutsy, bold way to start the movie, just a minute of child Bruce, and then he just gets us right into the story, and we just gotta trust him as we go along this ride. Okay, we're only a minute in, so I need to keep pushing, but I just love how this movie is edited. In the present, we see that Bruce has found himself in a prison, getting in fights, and not afraid to get hurt. A far cry from his privileged upbringing inside Wayne Manor. Before he's even Batman, Bruce is destroying these 10+ guys, all taking him on in a fight. This is a signal of the action that we're going to see throughout the Dark Knight trilogy. A testament to the heightened realism that Nolan was looking for. Something realistic that the viewer can actually latch onto that I don't believe had really been done in a superhero movie up to this point. Maybe you can count the Peter Parker versus Green Goblin final fight whenever they are just punching each other in the face, but up to this point it was more fantastical fights and not something down and dirty like this. Bruce is approached by Liam Neeson's character Henry Ducard about joining a group of ninjas entitled the League of Shadows, thrusting us into one of the aspects of this iteration of the character that I love the most, that he is more mental and less brutish or brawn, I guess. A Batman who's been trained to be a ninja. I mean, this just dives into the aspects of the character that I love the most. The idea that he's really more of a detective than a fighter, someone who thinks but isn't afraid to act, whose every move is calculated. All of that begins here with the League of Shadows plotline in this film. It also gives us Ken Watanabe as Ra's al Ghul, who has to be one of the most underrated actors in the world. While I think he wasn't fully utilized in this film, he's still a presence simply by being there, and I appreciate his involvement with the film. The League of Shadows also brings about action sequences that dive deeper into what I talked about before. Realistic action scenes that aren't just a CGI fest. It's easy to disassociate from action scenes when it's all things that we know aren't there or that aren't at least plausible in our world. With doing this origin, it allowed for some awesome fight choreography in a unique setting. I found that by opening up with this sort of setting was perfect for the story and the sort of action Nolan wanted associated with the film. After we see his introduction into the League of Shadows, we cut back to the past with Bruce's father saving him from what would become the Batcave. This sort of cut in the scene following draw the parallel between Bruce's father and Henry Ducard. It proposes the idea of Ducard serving as a mentor and father figure who's tough on him but wants him to succeed. Someone Bruce hasn't thought he's had since his father was murdered long ago. My personal belief is that Michael Caine's Alfred provided plenty of guidance for Bruce whenever he was growing up, but Bruce probably couldn't appreciate it, so we're not treated to cut scenes with Alfred being that fatherly figure. I mean, we're given one thing right after Bruce's parents' funeral, but that's about it. We don't see a whole lot in the upbringing, but he's played by Michael Caine. Surely he was a great role model for Bruce Wayne. In this cutscene to the past, we're also introduced to the guilt that Bruce feels for his parents' murder. It was actually Bruce that asked his parents to leave the play early because there were bats featured in it, and after his situation inside the Batcave, I'm just going to keep calling it the Batcave. After his situation in the Batcave, he was deathly afraid of bats, so he asked his parents to leave. They went down a back alley and they got shot. All right in front of Bruce. But within this horrifying situation, we're also introduced to Commissioner Gordon, who provides, I guess, a person that can support Bruce Wayne during this terrible, tragic time. All he does is just provide some comforting words and put a blanket around the kid's shoulders, providing Bruce with a brief, momentary comfort in a horrible, tragic night. A gesture that Bruce would never forget even into adulthood, and something that would teach him that in a city full of liars and murderers, you still had good men that would just support a kid whose parents just died. We then cut back to the present with a really cool training montage, but Nolan style. The montage includes a booming score by Hans Zimmer that's simply iconic, remarkable landscapes, and sword action on ice. I just think that's really, really cool. We also see the introduction of certain tools and devices for Bruce that he would go on to utilize as Batman. It's a scene that could have been done by the numbers and considered passable, but through interlacing all of these elements along with dialogue from Ducard to Bruce, it really goes the extra mile, showing the seeds planted in Bruce's mind from the League of Shadows that he would go on to use as Batman. We also continue to see a growing bond form between Bruce and Ducard. And Ducard delivers one of the most memorable lines of the entire movie in this scene. He tells Bruce that your anger gives you power, but if you let it, it will destroy you. Everything just going the extra mile here, even the script, something like that. It's a very simple line, but the way that he says it to Bruce and at that certain time in Bruce's life, it just heightens everything about it. We then cut back to the past again, but this time it's a college-aged Bruce who's back in Gotham and tries to stand up to organized crime within the city. But he has to learn the hard way that it doesn't matter how much money he has, it doesn't matter what his last name is, the person that has the real power in Gotham is a man by the name of Carmine Falcone. Falcone doesn't care who Bruce Wayne is, all he sees is a rich kid whining about the fact that his mom and dad aren't there. It's in this moment where Bruce makes a decision. He could either stay in Gotham, live his life as part of the system that killed his parents but reap the rewards of being super rich, or he can leave it all behind and try to become a person who can potentially change the city. I think we know which choice he made. Now that we've gone back and forth between the past and the present for a bit, it's time now to see Bruce graduate from the League of Shadows. We understand where his mind is at, where he's been, what he's been through during multiple points of his life. Now it's time to be put to the test. The League prompts him to execute a criminal. Bruce decides to say no, go against the League, declaring that he is not an executioner. What we get next is an incredible scene where Bruce defeats the League and burns down their temple. However, when Ducard is nearly killed after falling off a ledge, Bruce saves him. Knowing full well that Ducard could come right back to Bruce and attack him, Bruce isn't going to be responsible for another father figure in his life being killed. Now here we have the moral compass of Bruce Wayne / Batman. That while he has a very special array of skills and a tragic backstory, he's not going to go out there and murder people. Now, I think that this is great and all, but he still beats the crap out of guys who probably in real life wouldn't get up after some of these hits, but what's important here is that we understand who Bruce is. Through 40 minutes, we've seen this guy's life story and understand who exactly he is. While he still has a way to go in truly forgiving himself, he's never been more sure of who he is and what his capabilities are in life. He's finally in a position where he can help people. He's not going to become another cog in the machine that inflicts pain and suffering onto others. Again, he completely beats the crap out of guys, but it's for the ultimate goal of making Gotham a better place. He, at least on paper, isn't killing anyone, and the guys he beats up are criminals, so you know, it's not gonna be perfect, but it is what it is. At least whenever he goes out there and he acts, it's not because someone just blindly told him to do it. It's at this point where the non-linear storytelling ends and we see Bruce return to Gotham. He's now ready to become a symbol that is not corruptible and is able to fight the criminal underbelly that has taken over Gotham. A major part of the system that keeps these criminals from seeing real prison time is Tommy fucking Shelby. I mean, Dr. Jonathan Crane, played by Cillian Murphy. He's a twisted doctor who represents mob members in trial, declares them insane, thus improving their circumstances upon conviction. He's gonna be one of our primary villains of this movie, the Scarecrow. Again, not played by Coolio. What are we doing, guys? I think we can all agree that Chris Nolan is a coward for not casting Coolio. We needed to see his version of Scarecrow, but Cillian Murphy's alright, I guess. But seriously, I like the direction they went with this character here as a person who sprays gas in his victims' faces, making them hallucinate and see horrifying imagery. Later on in the film, it brings about a plot point that I'm not in love with, but I'll get to that later. What's important now is to understand that this is a guy helping maintain the system that Bruce is hoping to take down. We also see that since Bruce has been away, his childhood best friend Rachel Dawes has become a prosecuting attorney, one who actively fights against the mob and Dr. Crane, seeking true justice and representing the group of people in Gotham who Bruce believes are really going to be its saving grace. He can be the symbol that inspires them, but these are the people that can do the actual legwork legally to change the city. Rachel and Commissioner Gordon are people who don't have to hide in the shadows to seek justice. There isn't a next symbol in the next scene, but I love it all the same. It's just Bruce coming into Wayne Enterprises after having been declared dead, surprising the men who took over his father's company while he was gone. It's a scene done 10 times over, but it is never not satisfying to see. Bruce then accepts a random position in Lucius Fox's Applied Sciences department. It's basically the gadget department of Wayne Enterprises that's just been thrown in the basement. These gadgets that people find useless are the exact ones that Bruce is going to use as Batman. And Fox is played by Morgan Freeman, an American classic. I don't think he's ever delivered a bad scene in his career. That's no different in this film too. I love him as this old school guy who is pushed into the basement, who never outright says that he knows what Bruce is doing in this movie, but he knows. He's not dumb or oblivious. He's someone that Bruce's dad trusted, who Bruce can now put his trust into as well. Again, another symbol of the good people of Gotham who have been relegated to the basement while these snakes on the top floor weave their way through Thomas Wayne's vision. I absolutely love Morgan Freeman in this role and in this trilogy. Now, with some tools in his arsenal, Bruce makes first contact with Commissioner Gordon as a masked figure. He's not in the full-out bat suit yet, he's dressed more like a burglar, but he's just trying to establish trust with Commissioner Gordon before he dons the cap and cowl, I think is how you say it. Seeking information because he knows Gordon is one of the few cops in the city who isn't crooked. We also see a rough version of Batman in a ski mask, jumping and slamming into a fire escape. Classic trial and error conducive to any job. Only this guy is investigating and fighting crime. Throughout this section of the movie, Bruce continues to snag different pieces of equipment that are going to help him as Batman, as well as gather information about crime bosses throughout the city. Figures out who the crooked cops are, who he can trust. It's all really interesting stuff that is just the background work that he needs to do before he makes his grand appearance as Batman. He ultimately makes his grand debut in an awesome scene where he halts a deal for Carmine Falcone in a shipping yard. We don't see too much of the action in this scene, and we don't even really get a good look of Batman until he successfully snags Carmine Falcone and declares the iconic line, "I'm Batman." Only this time with a voice that's been the center of controversy within the film community for years. Now, this is something that I actually think Batman vs. Superman went in the right direction in implementing a voice changer for Batman. I think the voice is a little silly, but it's still in line with the grounded realism that Nolan wanted with this movie, but I feel like in this basement full of gadgets, Bruce could have found some sort of voice changer, but, you know, whatever. It's not the best iteration of the Batman voice, but but it's fine for this version. In his debut as Batman, he also reveals himself to Rachel, establishing trust and stopping the men Falcone sent to kill her, as well as providing evidence she can use to prosecute. He gives the police and Rachel enough for them to understand that there's a new crime fighter in the city, and he's doing the things that they're not allowed to do, helping them do their job by doing things that would get them fired or arrested. His groundwork with Officer Gordon also reaps its benefits, as Gordon's the only one to defend Batman when some cops start ragging on a guy in a bat suit, showing more and more that Bruce's real superpower is his mind, not the gadgets. But Bruce needs to portray this sort of playboy persona so no one can even fathom that he might be Batman. He can't just be this recluse detective vigilante, he has to be this person that people think he is. So we get this scene where Bruce takes these two dates to dinner, they swim in a pond that's not meant to be swimming, the waiter asks him to leave, and he just hands him a check for the hotel. I know it's not who he really is, but I love that scene so much. I think it's hilarious. Now, after this point in the movie where we've gotten his origin and he's kind of taken down Carmine Falcone, I feel like the movie loses some steam. While the first hour is great in how Bruce becomes Batman and his initial introduction is enthralling, I just didn't find the plotline with Scarecrow to be all that compelling. Up to this point, we've gotten a film that's grounded in realism, and now the final boss fight is gonna involve microwave emitters and gas being sprung up through the water supply of Gotham. It just seems a little out of place in this movie, or at least the movie that we had gotten up to this point. That's just me though. You can disagree with me all you want. That's just how I feel about the movie at this point in the third act. The story up to this point was more so Bruce Wayne looking to inspire the city of Gotham to be better while serving as a symbolic crime fighter. This felt like a threat from any random action movie and still leaves me disappointed to this day. We get plenty of Batman action and investigating, but this movie's first half is far better than its second in my humble opinion. I think the themes proposed in this movie are more fully fleshed out in its sequel. A movie that's much later in this countdown, that is a conversation for a completely different day far from now. But still, through the second half of the movie, we see Bruce continue to fortify his relationship with Commissioner Gordon as Batman. We get some nice Batman investigating scenes, and we get the introduction of the Tumbler, which you guys know I love. I said it before, but that thing is just so cool. I love anytime we get a long shot with that as the primary focus. The action scene where Batman is fleeing from the police in his Tumbler is incredible. Watching the cops slowly realize as they try to chase this dude that he is not a normal vigilante and his tools are way cooler than theirs is awesome. In the second half of the film, we also revisit Liam Neeson's character, Henry Ducard, or should I say, Ra's al Ghul. Turns out he was the leader of the League of Shadows, and Watanabe's character was just a decoy. By saving Ducard, Bruce effectively saved the League of Shadows, who are at the head of the plot to destroy Gotham, a city that Ghul deems to be irredeemable. Bruce sees this as a complete betrayal of his relationship with Ducard, or I guess I should say Ra's al Ghul. This is the guy who trained Bruce, taught him so much, both physically and mentally. Bruce even saved his life, and now he's coming back to destroy Gotham, the city that Bruce is trying to save. Ghul gives Bruce a second chance to join the League before they destroy Gotham and the people inside it, but Bruce digs in his heels again. Doesn't fear men like this that give him this sort of ultimatum, partially because of the guy giving him the ultimatum. He knows his mission, he knows his training, and he refuses to give in. Ghul then says something that brings home the idea of a father figure and what it means to do what's right. He says to Bruce, like your father, you lack the courage to do what is necessary. This tells Bruce two things. One, Ghul was only a father figure to Bruce when he believed he could assist him in his mission. When someone doesn't fully submit to Ghul's ideal, they're just another body in the pile. And two, that Bruce's dad was more courageous than Ghul has ever been, for he had the courage to try to do what was right without sacrificing the innocent. To me, this says that Bruce is incredibly unique. He both has the moral fortitude of his father and the physical capability of the League of Shadows. He's one of the very few select people who can make a difference without sacrificing his morals in the process. So while this film's second act doesn't live up to the first in my opinion, it still remains so strong thematically with what was teed up in the first half, and we see the growth of Bruce as a character beyond Batman, a testament to the writing of David S. Goyer and the direction of Chris Nolan. Bruce is able to save a young Joffrey Baratheon as well as the city of Gotham, while also receiving help from Alfred, who saves him from the burning Wayne Manor that the League set on fire, and Commissioner Gordon, I'm just going to keep calling him Commissioner Gordon, who destroys a section of the monorail before it can be used to transport the microwave emitter that's going to destroy the city. Showing again that Bruce can't save Gotham alone. It takes good, honest people willing to help to really make a difference. Near the end of the climax of this film, Bruce is faced with the hardest moral dilemma up to this point. As Ghul stands on the train plummeting without a track in front of it, Bruce makes the decision to not save him this time. In my eyes, this is Bruce making an exception for the no-killing rule. Because yeah, Bruce didn't directly kill him, but through not saving Ghul, he basically did. This tells me that Bruce learned more from Ra's al Ghul than maybe he's willing to admit. That whenever it comes down to it, he is willing to make the tough decision to let one person die to save a city. Whenever he's faced with someone who will not quit, he's going to make the tough decision. There's so much with that very last decision for his character that I feel like doesn't get talked about enough, but I find it to be one of the more grounded, realistic portrayals of the character, because he's looked at as this guy who doesn't kill people, but in this scene, he basically does, and it shows us that while he has this moral fortitude, he's willing to make an exception to save Gotham. It's a really powerful scene for me, and I just had to share my feelings on it. The movie culminates with the city being saved, Bruce taking back his dad's company, promoting Fox, he and Rachel reconnecting but deciding they can't be together. Oh, I forgot to mention Bruce told Rachel he's Batman in a sort of roundabout way, but yeah, that happened. Gordon constructing the Bat Signal, and Wayne Manor burned to the ground, leaving Bruce and Alfred to pick up the pieces and rise the building back from the ash. Nolan closes the film with a little tease to the iconic villain to come. And that's Batman Begins. I sing this movie's praises, but also recognize that it's not perfect. This movie's second half doesn't live up to the first, in my opinion, and Chris Nolan shows that he had a little ways to go in shooting action. There's just a little bit too much shaky cam in this movie for me, but still, this is a really fantastic origin story. And it's an origin story that's just told so differently. And you may be asking yourself, if I have these significant problems with the movie, why is it that it's up so high? Well, one, it's a fantastic movie. I love it. If you haven't gotten that from this probably very long video, I haven't edited down obviously because I'm filming it, but I can imagine this is going to be a long one. I remember being a kid living in Montana, going to see this movie at a small local theater with my dad, and just being blown away by what I saw. I had never seen anything quite like this, and it unlocked a part of my life that stays to this day. A curiosity of the portrayal of these larger-than-life characters, while also showing who the man behind the mask is. That these guys aren't perfect. In fact, they're far from it. But at the end of the day, this is the story of someone overcoming their challenges and the pain of the past and trying to do what's right. All in the face of people who are trying to beat him down and get him to be someone who he isn't. And while at the end of the movie, Bruce, gives in a little bit for the sake of Ra's al Ghul not attacking the city, for the most part, he digs in his heels and he knows who he is now. It's a fantastic origin movie, and one of the best ones that I've ever seen. Batman Begins started one of the best trilogies ever put to film and got Chris Nolan on the mainstream map. It often gets forgotten in the shadow of its sequel, The Dark Knight, but it's still one of my favorite movies, and it's my number 84 on the 100 movie marathon. Thank you so much for watching the video up to this point. I really appreciate it. A lot of work goes into these videos on the list, so it means more than you know. Please consider subscribing if you aren't already. It helps the channel grow, and I'll see you next time on the 100 movie marathon. Bye, guys.